In 1914, a British woman drawing lines on a map with a ruler accidentally created a country that was designed to fail. And today, 223 million people live inside that mistake. But here is what nobody tells you. Nigeria wasn't just drawn randomly. It was engineered as a weapon, a colonial time bomb that the British knew would explode the moment they left. And it did, three times. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Nigeria's borders make zero sense. How one British official's wife literally named an entire country over breakfast, and why this West African giant is simultaneously Africa's biggest success story and its greatest tragedy. Because what happened in Nigeria didn't just shape Africa, it became the blueprint for how empires destroy nations from inside out. This is the story they don't teach you in school. A woman named Flora Shaw sits at her breakfast table reading her husband's reports about Britain's new territories in West Africa. Flora isn't a politician. She's not a general. She's a journalist for the Times. But what she's about to do will affect more people than almost any politician in history. She writes an article suggesting that Britain's confusing collection of territories around the Niger River needs a simpler name. Her suggestion: Nigeria. That's it. One woman, one breakfast, one newspaper article, and boom, a country is named before it even exists. But here is where it gets insane. At this point, Nigeria isn't even a real place. It's just a name for three completely different regions that have absolutely nothing in common. The North, with Islamic sultanates, Hausa and Fulani people, ruled for centuries by powerful emirs. Think desert kingdoms with cavalry armies and Sharia law. The Middle Belt, with hundreds of smaller ethnic groups, different religions, different languages. This is the buffer zone nobody controlled. The South, with Yoruba kingdoms in the west, Igbo communities in the east, coastal, Christian and traditional religions, totally different power structures. These places were as different from each other as France is from Saudi Arabia. Different languages, different religions, different economies, different governments. They had been separate for thousands of years. And then one day in 1914, a British guy named Frederick Lugard said, "You know what? Let's just smash them together." Not because it made sense, not because the people wanted it, but because it was cheaper to administer. One signature, zero consent, the amalgamation of 1914, and just like that, Nigeria was born. A nation that was never supposed to exist, now existed. Now, you might be thinking, okay, they merged some territories together. That happened everywhere. What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. The British didn't just create Nigeria, they rigged it. Frederick Lugard had a strategy called indirect rule. Sounds boring, right? It's not. Here's how it worked. Instead of governing Nigeria directly, Britain would keep the existing power structures in the north, the Islamic emirs and sultans, and use them as puppets. Why? Because the north was hierarchical, centralized, easy to control through a few leaders. The south, decentralized, democratic, hundreds of autonomous communities, much harder to control. So the British gave the North all the political power, even though the South was more educated, even though the South had more economic exposure to Western systems. The British literally designed Nigeria so that one region would always dominate the others. And here's the worst part. They drew the internal borders to make sure the North would always have more people. In 1914, the North had roughly 55% of the population. Today, still around 55%. That's not a coincidence. But while the North had the numbers, the British deliberately limited education there By 1960, when Nigeria gained independence, the South had thousands of university graduates, the North had less than 100. Think about that. You create a country where political power is based on population. Then you make sure the region with the most people have the least education. Then you give that region control over the regions with the most education and resources. What do you think happens next? You create a time bomb, and the British knew it. In private letters, British officials literally wrote about how Nigeria's structure would inevitably lead to conflict. They knew, and they did it anyway. Because here's the truth about colonialism that nobody wants to say out loud. The chaos was the point. A divided Nigeria could never unite against Britain. A divided Nigeria could never become powerful to challenge British interests. A divided Nigeria would need British mediation forever. So when Britain finally left in 1960, they didn't leave a country. They left a trap, and 223 million people are still living inside it. Nigeria has been independent for less than 6 years, and it's about to tear itself apart for the first time. A group of mostly Igbo officers from the south staged a military coup. They killed the prime minister. They killed regional leaders, mostly from the north. Their stated goal: end corruption, unify Nigeria. The north sees it differently. To them, this is the south trying to take over. 6 months later, a counter coup occurs. Northern officers kill the Igbo military leader, then the massacre begins. Between May and September 1966, an estimated 30,000 to 50,000 Igbo people are killed in the north. Entire families burned alive in their homes. Over 1 million Igbo refugees flee back to the southeast. And on May 30th, 1967, the eastern region makes a decision. If Nigeria won't protect us, we will protect ourselves. They declare independence. The Republic of Biafra is born. And Nigeria's response? Total war. The Nigerian government, backed by Britain and the Soviet Union, surrounds Biafra. Complete blockade. No food in, no medicine in. The goal isn't just military victory, it's starvation. What happens next becomes one of the worst humanitarian disasters in modern history. Between 1967 and 1970, an estimated 1 to 3 million people died. Most of them children, not from bullets, from starvation. The images of starving Biafran children shook the world. They became the first televised famine. The photos are so refined they literally inspired the creation of Doctors Without Borders. And when Biafra finally surrenders in January 1970, Nigeria declares, "No victor, no vanquished." But here is what they don't tell you. Every Igbo person's bank account, no matter how much they had, was replaced with £20. Life savings, businesses, generational wealth, gone. Properties abandoned during the war, seized. Abandoned property laws targeted Igbo people specifically. No victor, no vanquished. That was a lie. Since then, Nigeria has had 8 successful military coups, multiple failed coup attempts, 2 transitions to democracy that failed, 1 current democracy that's barely holding on. And today, Boko Haram in the northeast, bandit armies in the northwest, farmer-elder conflicts across the Middle Belt, separatist movements in the southeast, militancy in the south. The bomb that Britain planted in 1914, it's still exploding, just in slow motion. But here is where the story gets weird, because by every logical measure, Nigeria should have collapsed by now. And yet, Nigeria is one of Africa's largest economy, the world's 6th most populous country, expected to become the 3rd most populous by 2050, home to Africa's biggest tech ecosystem, produces some of the biggest artists, writers, and entrepreneurs. Burna Boy, Wizkid, Davido, Chimamanda Adichie. Nollywood produces more films than Hollywood. Lagos has more startups than anywhere else in Africa. So what's happening here? How does a country that was designed to fail somehow keep succeeding? Here's the secret nobody talks about. The Nigerian people are holding together what the Nigerian state keeps trying to tear apart. In universities, you'll find Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa students as best friends. In markets, you'll find people from every region doing business together. In cities, you'll find mixed marriages that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. There's this thing that Nigerians do that's hard to explain to outsiders. It's called managing. The power goes out. People buy generators. The roads are terrible. People create informal taxi systems. The government fails. People create their own economies. Nigerians have become experts at surviving despite their government, not because of it. And when pushed too far, like during the EndSARS protest in 2020, young Nigerians from every ethnic group united, not as Igbo, Yoruba or Hausa, but as Nigerians. And that's what terrifies the old power structures. Because if Nigerians ever fully united along class lines instead of ethnic lines, if they ever stopped fighting each other and started demanding accountability from their leaders, the elites who have been exploiting those colonial divisions for 110 years, they would lose everything. So the question isn't really, why does Nigeria keep failing? The question is, why do Nigeria's leaders keep choosing failure? And the answer is simple. Because division is profitable and unity is dangerous. So, can Nigeria be fixed? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Not with the current structure. Because here is what a lot of Nigerians have been saying for decades. True federalism. Let each region control its own resources. Let each region develop at its own pace. Stop forcing 250 plus ethnic groups to pretend that they are the same. Look at the United States. 50 states with massive autonomy. Look at Germany. 16 states with their own constitutions. Look at Canada. Provinces with independent powers. These countries understood something Nigeria's leaders refused to admit. You can't force unity. You have to build it. All the oil money goes to the central government in Abuja. The politicians fight over how to divide it. Then they divide it along ethnic lines to buy loyalty. Then they blame other ethnic groups for the corruption. It's the same playbook Britain wrote in 1914, just with Nigerian faces now. But here's what gives me hope. The generation that's rising doesn't remember the Civil War. They don't remember military rule. They remember growing up without power. They remember going to universities that don't have books. They remember watching politicians steal billions while hospitals collapse. And they are angry, not at each other, at the system. There are more Nigerian doctors in the US than in Nigeria, more Nigerian engineers in Canada than in Nigeria, more Nigerian entrepreneurs in the UK than in Nigeria. That's not brain drain, that's brain exile. Talented people forced to leave because the system won't let them thrive. But imagine if Nigeria actually restructured. Imagine if the oil states kept their oil revenue. Imagine if the tech hubs kept their innovation revenue. Imagine if regions competed to attract talent instead of driving it away. A truly federal Nigeria, where regions have real power, wouldn't just survive, it would become an African superpower. By 2050, Nigeria will have over 400 million people. That's more than the United States. The question is, will those 400 million people be fighting over scraps in a failed state, or building the most dynamic economy in Africa? The answer depends on whether Nigerians can do something their leaders have never done. Put the country before the tribe. Put the future before the past. Put unity before division. And whether they can finally escape the trap that Britain set 110 years ago. So here is the truth about Nigeria. It was never supposed to exist, but it does. It was designed to fail, but it hasn't. It was built on divisions that should have destroyed it 100 times over. But 223 million people wake up every day and choose to keep it alive. Not because the borders make sense, not because the system is fair, but because they have decided that the idea of Nigeria, messy, chaotic, impossible Nigeria, is worth fighting for. And maybe that's the most African story of all, taking something broken and refusing to let it die. That's the Nigeria they don't teach you about. Now you know why. If this changed how you see Nigerian history, hit subscribe. We are breaking down the hidden stories that shaped our world. And drop a comment. Do you think Nigeria can be restructured? Or is it too late? See you in the next one.